The bullet shattered the concrete inches from Private First Class Rebecca Martinez's face, sending razor-sharp fragments across her cheek as she pressed herself against the crumbling wall of what had once been a school in downtown Kandahar. Blood trickled down her jaw, mixing with the dust and sweat that coated her skin like war paint. Above her, the distinctive crack of a K-47 fire echoed through the narrow alleyway, punctuated by the deeper boom of improvised explosive devices, detonating somewhere in the maze of buildings that surrounded her position. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone in a city that wanted her dead. 6 months earlier, Rebecca had been just another face in the crowd at Fort Benning, Georgia, enduring the relentless scrutiny of Drill Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a man whose voice could strip paint from walls and whose opinion of female soldiers bordered on prehistoric. Thompson had made it clear from day one that he didn't believe women belonged in combat roles, and he'd made Rebecca his personal project to prove that point. But now, as insurgent fighters closed in on her position from 3 directions, Rebecca's mind wasn't on the drill sergeant's harsh words or the countless push-ups he'd demanded when she'd failed to meet his impossible standards. Her focus was razor-sharp, honed by months of training and the brutal clarity that comes when death hovers just heartbeats away. The radio on her vest crackled with static and desperate voices. "Phoenix Base, this is Bravo Team. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate backup." The voice belonged to Sergeant David Kumar, her squad leader, a good man who'd fought beside her through countless patrols in this godforsaken corner of Afghanistan. "Bravo Team, Phoenix Base. All available units are engaged. You're on your own for now." Rebecca closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady, her breathing controlled. She checked her M4 carbine, ensuring the magazine was seated properly, and began moving through the shadows toward the sound of her team's voices. The story of how Private First Class Rebecca Martinez came to be pinned down in hostile territory began 3 days earlier, when intelligence reports had indicated the presence of a high-value target in the Kandahar marketplace. Hassan al-Rashid was a bomb maker whose improvised explosive devices had killed dozens of coalition forces over the past year. The mission was supposed to be routine: observe, identify, and coordinate with local forces for capture. Nothing about it had been routine. Rebecca's squad had established an observation post in an abandoned apartment building overlooking the market square. For 18 hours, they'd watched through high-powered scopes as hundreds of civilians went about their daily business, buying bread, haggling over prices, living their lives in the shadow of a war that had consumed their country for over a decade. She'd grown up in East Los Angeles, where violence was a constant companion and survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had served 2 tours in Vietnam before returning home to work double shifts at a factory that made aircraft parts. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings at night to help make ends meet. Neither parent had understood their daughter's decision to join the army, but they'd supported her with the quiet dignity that had defined their entire lives. Rebecca's childhood had been marked by the sound of helicopters overhead and the distant pop of gunfire that echoed through the neighborhood. She'd learned to distinguish between firecrackers and bullets before she was old enough to ride a bicycle. School had been her escape, a place where teachers recognized her intelligence and encouraged her to dream beyond the boundaries of her zip code. When Army recruiters had visited her high school, Rebecca had seen an opportunity that transcended the limitations of her circumstances. The military offered structure, purpose, and the chance to serve something larger than herself. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, had encouraged her to consider college instead, but Rebecca's family couldn't afford tuition, and Student loans felt like another form of imprisonment out at 18. She'd signed her enlistment papers with hands that didn't shake, despite the magnitude of the decision she was making. Basic training at Fort Benning had been everything she'd expected and worse. The heat, the exhaustion, the constant pressure to perform beyond human limitations. But it was Drill Sergeant Thompson's personal vendetta against her that had nearly broken her spirit. Thompson was a career soldier with 22 years of service, multiple combat deployments, and deeply ingrained beliefs about women in the military that belonged to a different era. He'd served in Iraq during the initial invasion, where he'd seen friends die and had his own faith in military leadership shaken by poorly planned operations and inadequate equipment. From Rebecca's first day at Fort Benning, Thompson had singled her out for special attention. While other recruits struggled with standard physical training requirements, Rebecca faced obstacles that seemed designed to ensure her failure. Extra miles on runs, additional weight in her pack during marchers, equipment inspections that bordered on harassment. Martinez, Thompson had bellowed during her third week of training. You think this is some kind of summer camp? You think the enemy's going to take it easy on you because you're a woman? Rebecca had stood at attention, eyes forward, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her frustration. No, Drill Sergeant. I can't hear you, Private. No, Drill Sergeant. Thompson had circled her like a predator, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than his shouts. Let me tell you something, Martinez. In combat, weakness gets people killed. Not just you, but the soldiers depending on you. You want to play soldier? You better prove you can handle what that means. The physical challenges had been brutal, but the psychological warfare had been worse. Thompson had a talent for finding each recruit's breaking point and applying pressure with surgical precision. For Rebecca, that pressure came in the form of constant doubt about her capabilities, questions about whether she possessed the courage necessary to face real combat. During live-fire exercises, Thompson would position himself where Rebecca could see him, watching her every move with obvious skepticism. When she hit targets with precision that exceeded many of her male counterparts, he'd find fault with her stance or her breathing or the way she held her weapon. When she excelled in tactical exercises, he'd question whether she'd have the nerve to make life-or-death decisions under actual fire. Shooting at paper targets isn't the same as shooting at someone who's shooting back, he'd told her after one particularly successful range session. Combat isn't about your scores, Martinez. It's about whether you can function when everything's falling apart around you. Rebecca's fellow recruits had offered sympathy and support, but she'd learned to rely on her own inner strength. She'd developed a mental technique that allowed her to transform Thompson's criticism into fuel for improvement. Every harsh word became motivation to prove him wrong. Every additional challenge an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. Private James Franklin, a soft-spoken kid from rural Montana, had become her closest friend during training. Franklin possessed natural marksmanship skills that impressed even Thompson, but he struggled with the physical demands of military life. Rebecca had helped him improve his running times, while he'd shared techniques for managing stress and maintaining focus under pressure. Don't let him get to you, Franklin had advised after one particularly brutal day. Thompson's old school. He thinks he's protecting the military by weeding out people he considers weak. But I've watched you, Rebecca. You're stronger than half the guys in our platoon. Private Lisa Chun, a pre-med student from California who'd joined the Army to pay for medical school, had offered a different perspective. Thompson's not just testing your physical abilities, she'd observed. He's testing your mental resilience. Can you maintain your performance when someone's actively trying to break you down? That's actually a valuable skill in combat. The three had formed an unlikely alliance, supporting each other through the demanding weeks of basic training. Franklin's steady calm balanced Rebecca's intensity, While Chun's analytical approach helped them all understand the psychological aspects of military preparation. As training progressed, Rebecca had begun to excel in areas that surprised even her instructors. Her urban background had given her skills that proved valuable in combat scenarios. She could read people's intentions quickly, navigate complex environments efficiently, and make rapid decisions under pressure. Her marksmanship improved steadily, but more importantly, she developed tactical thinking that impressed senior non-commissioned officers. During a field exercise simulating urban combat, Rebecca had identified a flaw in the planned approach that could have resulted in civilian casualties. Her suggestion for an alternative route had been initially dismissed by the exercise controller, but when Sergeant First Class Jennifer Walsh, a veteran of multiple deployments, had reviewed Rebecca's analysis, she'd agreed with the assessment. "Martinez," Walsh had said privately after the exercise, "that was good thinking. You've got instincts that can't be taught. Don't let Thompson's attitude make you doubt your abilities." But Thompson's influence had been pervasive. Even as Rebecca succeeded in various aspects of training, his constant skepticism had planted seeds of self-doubt that grew during quiet moments. She'd found herself questioning whether her successes were real or simply the result of instructors going easy on her because she was a woman. The possibility that she might freeze under actual combat conditions became a persistent worry that followed her through graduation and into advanced training. Advanced individual training had taken place at Fort Lee, Virginia, where Rebecca specialized in military intelligence analysis. The work suited her analytical mind and attention to detail. She'd learned to interpret satellite imagery, decode enemy communications, and synthesize information from multiple sources into actionable intelligence. Her instructors at Fort Lee had been impressed by her capabilities. Major Robert Davidson, an intelligence officer with extensive Middle East experience, had recommended her for specialized training in counterinsurgency operations. "Martinez has the right combination of analytical skills and tactical awareness," he'd written in her evaluation. "She understands that intelligence work isn't just about gathering information. It's about understanding how that information can be used effectively in the field." The recommendation had led to additional training at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where Rebecca had learned advanced interrogation techniques, cultural sensitivity protocols, and language skills that would prove invaluable during deployment. She'd studied Arabic intensively, achieving conversational proficiency that exceeded many soldiers with years of experience in the Middle East. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But throughout her training, Thompson's words had echoed in her mind. During stress exercises, she'd heard his voice questioning her courage. During weapons training, she'd remembered his skepticism about her ability to function under fire. The doubt he'd planted had become a constant companion, a voice that whispered questions about her capabilities whenever she faced challenging situations. Her deployment to Afghanistan had come 9 months after graduating from basic training. The flight to Bagram Air Base had taken 36 hours, including stops in Germany and Kuwait. Rebecca had spent the journey reading intelligence briefings about the current situation in Afghanistan, studying maps of areas where she might be deployed, and trying to prepare mentally for her first experience in a combat zone. The reality of Afghanistan had exceeded her expectations in every possible way. The heat was suffocating, the terrain was unforgiving, and the constant threat of attack created a level of stress that no training exercise could replicate. But Rebecca had adapted quickly, drawing on skills she developed during her urban upbringing and enhanced through military training. Her first weeks at Forward Operating Base Shank had been spent learning the rhythms of combat operations. She'd participated in routine patrols, analyzed intelligence reports, and gradually earned the respect of her fellow soldiers through consistent performance and unwavering professionalism. Sergeant. Kumar had initially been skeptical about having a new soldier in his squad, but Rebecca's contributions had quickly proven her value. Her language skills had enabled better communication with local civilians, while her analytical abilities had helped identify patterns in insurgent behavior that had previously gone unnoticed. Martinez, Kumar had told her after her first month. In the country, you're not what I expected. Most replacements take 6 months to really understand what we're dealing with here. You figured it out in 6 weeks. The compliment had meant more to Rebecca than any award or commendation. Kumar was a soldier's soldier, a man who'd earned his stripes through competence and courage. His approval carried weight that transcended rank or regulation. But even as Rebecca had established herself as a valuable team member, Thompson's voice had continued to whisper doubts. During firefights, she'd performed her duties with precision and calm, but afterward, she'd questioned whether her composure had been real courage or simply shock. When insurgents had detonated an improvised explosive device near her patrol, she'd responded according to training, but she'd wondered whether she would have acted differently if the threat had been more immediate. The mission that had brought her to the Kandahar marketplace had represented everything she'd trained for. Hassan al-Rashid wasn't just another target. He was a bomb maker whose devices had killed American soldiers and Afghan civilians with equal ruthlessness. Intelligence indicated that he would be meeting with weapon suppliers in the market, providing an opportunity to capture or eliminate a significant threat. Rebecca's role had been to provide overwatch and communication support while Kumar's team established surveillance positions around the market. Her position in the abandoned apartment building had offered excellent visibility of the target area, while her language skills enabled her to monitor civilian radio traffic for signs of insurgent activity. For 18 hours, the mission had proceeded according to plan. Al-Rashid had appeared exactly when intelligence had predicted, moving through the market with the casual confidence of a man who believed himself safe among the civilian population. Kumar's team had tracked his movements while Rebecca provided real-time updates on his location and activities, but Afghanistan had a way of turning routine operations into chaos without warning. The attack had begun with a single sniper shot that had killed Private Franklin instantly. Rebecca had watched through her scope as her friend from basic training had collapsed onto the concrete, his weapon clattering away from lifeless hands. The shot had come from a building 2 blocks away, fired by an insurgent who had apparently been watching Kumar's team as carefully as they'd been watching Al-Rashid. Within seconds, the marketplace had erupted into pandemonium. Civilians had fled in every direction while insurgent fighters had emerged from concealed positions with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Kumar's carefully planned operation had dissolved into a desperate fight for survival against an enemy that had been prepared for their arrival. Phoenix Base, this is Bravo Team, Kumar's voice crackled through Rebecca's radio. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Franklin is down. Say again, Franklin is KIA. Rebecca had felt the impact of Franklin's death like a physical blow, but training had taken over. She'd begun providing covering fire for Kumar's team while calling in their position to the base. Her shots had been precise and effective, forcing insurgent fighters to seek cover and giving her teammates precious seconds to establish defensive positions. But the insurgents had possessed significant advantages. They'd known the terrain intimately, had prepared positions throughout the area, and had clearly anticipated coalition forces' arrival. Kumar's team had found themselves surrounded and outgunned, fighting for their lives in an environment that favored their enemies. Martinez, Kumar had radioed, his voice tight with stress and pain. We need extraction, but the LZ is compromised. Can you find us an alternate route? Rebecca had studied the area through her scope, analyzing the urban terrain with skills she'd learned during intelligence training. The direct route to the planned extraction point was blocked by insurgent positions, but she'd identified a possible alternative that would require movement through the most dangerous part of the market area. "I see a possible route," she'd replied. "But it goes right through the kill zone. You'll be exposed for at least 200 meters. Negative on the exposed route. Too dangerous with wounded." Kumar's mention of the wounded had sent a chill through Rebecca's chest. "How many wounded?" "Chun took shrapnel in the leg. Rodriguez has a bullet in his shoulder. They can move, but not fast." Rebecca had closed her eyes, calculating possibilities and risks with the analytical precision she'd learned during training. Every option seemed to lead to disaster. Every choice carried the potential for more casualties. But as she'd weighed alternatives, Thompson's voice had whispered in her mind, questioning her courage, suggesting that she might freeze when faced with real decisions. The doubt had lasted only seconds, but it had been enough to crystallize Rebecca's understanding of what needed to happen. "Kumar," she'd said into her radio, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. "I'm coming down. I can clear the route and provide covering fire while you move the wounded." "Negative, Martinez. Stay in position. That's an order." But Rebecca had already begun moving, gathering her equipment and preparing to leave the relative safety of her observation post. She'd understood that following orders would likely result in the death or capture of her entire team. Sometimes, she'd realized, courage meant knowing when to disobey. As she'd made her way down the stairs of the abandoned building, Rebecca had thought about Thompson's words during training. He'd questioned whether she possessed the courage necessary for combat, whether she could function when everything was falling apart around her. Now, as she stepped into the alleyway where insurgent bullets were chipping concrete from walls, and the air was thick with smoke and dust, Rebecca had finally understood the answer to his question. She was about to walk through enemy fire alone, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear was irrelevant when people were depending on her. The courage Thompson had questioned was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. The first 50 meters of Rebecca's journey through the alleyway felt like walking through a nightmare made of concrete and gunpowder. Each step brought her closer to the intersection where Kumar's team was pinned down, and each step increased the volume of enemy fire echoing off the walls around her. The insurgents had established overlapping fields of fire that turned the narrow street into a death trap, but Rebecca moved with calculated precision, using doorways and debris piles as cover while advancing toward her objective, her tactical. Radio buzzed with increasing urgency as other coalition units across Kandahar reported similar ambushes. This wasn't a random attack on Kumar's surveillance mission. It was a coordinated offensive designed to inflict maximum casualties on American forces. Intelligence reports that had seemed reliable just hours earlier were proving to be elaborate deceptions, and Rebecca realized that al-Rashid hadn't been meeting weapon suppliers in the marketplace. He'd been coordinating the ambush that had killed Franklin and trapped her team. The weight of that understanding settled on her shoulders, like lead as she pressed herself against a bullet-scarred wall, listening to the distinctive chatter of AK-47 fire mixed with the deeper boom of rocket-propelled grenades. Through her earpiece, she could hear radio traffic from across the city as American units called for backup, medical evacuation, and air support. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Rebecca understood that help wouldn't be coming any time soon. "Martinez, where the hell are you?" Kumar's voice carried a mixture of anger and concern. "I ordered you to stay in overwatch position." "Negative, Sergeant," Rebecca replied, checking the corner ahead for enemy movement. "The overwatch position is compromised. Insurgents moved into the building after I left. You need someone on the ground to clear your route." She could hear Kumar cursing in the background, followed by the sound of sustained gunfire and Chun's voice calling for more ammunition. The team was burning through their supplies while trapped in a position that offered limited cover and no escape routes. Without intervention, they would be overrun within the hour. Rebecca's understanding of urban warfare had been shaped by her childhood in East Los Angeles, where gang violence had created its own form of combat zone. She'd learned to read the rhythms of street fighting, to understand how violence flowed through urban environments like water, finding the path of least resistance. The skills that had kept her alive as a teenager were now enhanced by military training that had taught her to apply those instincts systematically. The insurgents were using classic urban tactics, establishing kill zones at intersections while maintaining escape routes through buildings and rooftops. Their positioning suggested professional military training, possibly from foreign advisors who understood American combat doctrine. This wasn't the work of untrained fighters. These were experienced soldiers who had studied their enemy's methods and prepared accordingly. As Rebecca moved deeper into the maze of streets surrounding the marketplace, she began to understand the full scope of the ambush. The insurgents had prepared multiple fallback positions, coordinated communication systems, and weapons caches strategically placed throughout the area. They'd turned an entire neighborhood into a fortress designed to trap and destroy coalition forces, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed that American soldiers would follow standard operating procedures and wait for backup rather than adapt to changing circumstances. Rebecca reached the edge of the kill zone where Kumar's team was trapped, positioning herself behind the remains of a destroyed vehicle that provided cover from multiple directions. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, all focused on the small courtyard where her teammates had taken refuge. The insurgents had them surrounded, but their attention was completely focused on the trapped Americans. That tunnel vision was about to become their downfall. Rebecca's radio crackled with a new voice, one she recognized from briefings but had never heard in combat. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett, the battalion intelligence officer, was coordinating the response to attacks across the city. Bennett had earned her reputation during previous deployments in Iraq, where her analytical abilities and tactical insight had saved countless lives. "All units, this is Phoenix Actual." Bennett's voice carried the calm authority of an experienced commander. "We're tracking coordinated attacks at 7 locations. Enemy forces are using sophisticated communication and coordination. This is not a spontaneous uprising." The confirmation of Rebecca's analysis provided both validation and additional concern. If the attacks were coordinated across multiple locations, it meant the insurgents possessed intelligence capabilities that exceeded previous assessments. Someone had been feeding them information about coalition operations, possibly for weeks or months. Rebecca keyed her radio, switching to the intelligence frequency she'd been trained to monitor. "Phoenix Actual, this is Bravo 7. I'm observing enemy positions around the marketplace ambush. Requesting permission to engage." "Bravo 7, Phoenix Actual. What's your position and situation?" "I'm approximately 100 meters south of the kill zone. Enemy forces are concentrated on my team's position. I can take them from behind, but I'll be exposed during the approach." There was a pause that lasted several seconds, during which Rebecca could hear Bennett consulting with other officers. Finally, the colonel's voice returned with measured authority. "Bravo 7, you're authorized to engage at your discretion. Be advised that air support is unavailable for the next 30 minutes. You're on your own." The weight of that authorization settled on Rebecca's shoulders as she began planning her approach to the insurgent positions. She was being given permission to conduct a solo assault against superior numbers in hostile territory, with no backup and no air support. It was exactly the kind of situation that Thompson had insisted she couldn't handle. As Rebecca began moving toward the first insurgent position, her mind drifted to a conversation she'd had with her father before deploying to Afghanistan. Miguel Martinez had never spoken much about his experiences in Vietnam, but the night before she'd left for Bagram, he'd shared stories that had shaped her understanding of what combat really meant. "Mia," he'd said, using the Spanish endearment that connected her to her childhood, "war isn't about being brave. It's about doing what needs to be done when you're more scared than you've ever been in your life. The brave ones aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are terrified but do their job anyway. Her father's words echoed in her mind as she approached the first insurgent position, a second-story window overlooking Kumar's courtyard. The fighter was focused entirely on maintaining suppressive fire, his attention completely absorbed by the target below. Rebecca's approach went unnoticed until she was close enough to see the concentration on his face through her scope. The shot was clean and precise, dropping the insurgent instantly. Rebecca had been killed before during her deployment, but always at distance and always as part of a coordinated unit action. This was different. This was personal and immediate, a life-or-death decision made and executed in isolation. She felt no satisfaction in the kill, only grim recognition that it was one less threat to her team's survival. Moving to the second position required crossing an open street where other insurgents could potentially see her. Rebecca timed her movement to coincide with a particularly intense exchange of gunfire, using the noise and confusion to mask her approach. Her second target was positioned behind a concrete barrier, using a light machine gun to pin down Kumar's team with sustained fire. This engagement was more challenging, requiring Rebecca to approach close enough to ensure accuracy while avoiding detection by other fighters in the area. She waited for the insurgent to reload his weapon, then moved. During the brief pause in his fire, her shot took him center mass, silencing the machine gun that had been the most immediate threat to her teammates. But the second kill had been noticed by other insurgents, who began shifting their positions to search for the new threat. Rebecca realized that her element of surprise was disappearing, and her next moves would be increasingly dangerous. Kumar's voice crackled through her earpiece with renewed urgency. "Martinez, I don't know what you're doing out there, but keep it up. The pressure's easing. Copy that, Sergeant. I've neutralized 2 positions, but they're starting to look for me. Can you begin moving toward the extraction point?" "Negative. Shun's losing blood, and Rodriguez can barely hold his weapon. We need more time." Rebecca absorbed this information while planning her approach to the remaining insurgent positions. Her teammates were more seriously wounded than she'd realized, which meant she needed to eliminate all threats rather than simply creating an opening for escape. The mission parameters had shifted from providing covering fire to conducting a complete clearance operation. The third position was the most challenging yet, located on a rooftop with excellent visibility of the surrounding area. The insurgent stationed there was armed with a sniper rifle and had likely been responsible for Franklin's death. Reaching him would require Rebecca to expose herself to fire from other positions while climbing through a building that might contain additional fighters. But as she studied the tactical situation, Rebecca realized that eliminating the sniper would have the greatest impact on her team's survival chances. His position allowed him to observe and engage any movement toward the extraction point, making escape impossible while he remained active. Rebecca made her decision with the cold calculation that military training had instilled in her. She would assault the sniper position despite the risks, trusting her skills and training to see her through. The building that housed the sniper was a 3-story structure that had suffered significant damage from previous fighting. Holes in the walls provided both concealment and potential firing positions, but they also created opportunities for ambush. Rebecca entered through a ground-floor window, moving with the careful precision of a predator stalking dangerous prey. Each floor she climbed brought new challenges and potential threats. On the second floor, she encountered evidence of recent insurgent activity: ammunition caches, communication equipment, and maps that showed detailed knowledge of coalition patrol routes. The insurgents had been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months, studying American tactics and preparing countermeasures for every contingency. But they hadn't prepared for a single soldier willing to assault their positions. Alone, Rebecca reached the 3rd floor and could hear the snipers rifle firing at regular intervals, each shot aimed at keeping Kumar's team pinned down. She positioned herself to observe his location while remaining hidden behind damaged walls and debris. The insurgent was completely focused on his targets below, unaware that death was approaching from behind. Rebecca's final approach required crossing 15 feet of open floor space, during which any sound or movement could alert her target. She timed her movement to coincide with the sound of his rifle, using the noise to mask her footsteps. When she reached firing position, the sniper was in the middle of acquiring a new target. She didn't hesitate. The shot ended the insurgent's threat permanently, but it also announced Rebecca's presence to every remaining fighter in the area. Muzzle flashes immediately began appearing from windows and doorways as insurgents attempted to locate and eliminate the new threat. Rebecca found herself trapped on a rooftop under fire from multiple directions, with her only escape route leading through the same building where additional insurgents might be waiting. The tactical situation had shifted dramatically, and she was now the one pinned down and fighting for survival. But the psychological effect of her actions had been exactly what she'd hoped for. The insurgents were no longer coordinating their fire on Kumar's position. They were reacting to an unexpected threat that had appeared behind their lines. Their carefully planned ambush was dissolving into confusion and desperate attempts to locate a single American soldier who had penetrated their defenses. Kumar's team was finally able to begin moving toward the extraction point, carrying their wounded while Rebecca provided covering fire from her elevated position. She could see Chun limping heavily while Rodriguez struggled to maintain his grip on his weapon, but both soldiers were mobile and fighting effectively despite their injuries. The extraction point was still 3 blocks away, and the route was far from clear. But for the first time since the ambush had begun, Rebecca could see a path to survival for her team. As she prepared to fight her way down from the rooftop and rejoin her teammates, Rebecca thought about Thompson's questions regarding her courage. The drill sergeant had wanted to know if she could function when everything was falling apart around her, whether she possessed the mental toughness necessary for combat, looking out over a battlefield where she'd just conducted a solo assault. Against superior numbers while under fire, Rebecca finally had her answer. She wasn't just functioning, she was thriving. And she was far from finished. The grenade exploded 12 feet from Rebecca's position, showering her with concrete fragments and filling the air with choking dust that turned the rooftop into a gray nightmare. Her ears rang from the blast, but muscle memory took over as she rolled behind an air conditioning unit that had been perforated by shrapnel but still provided minimal cover. The insurgents had pinpointed her location and were methodically attempting to eliminate her with a combination of grenades and coordinated rifle fire. Through the haze, Rebecca could see Kumar's team making progress toward the extraction point, moving in tactical bounds while she drew enemy attention. Chun was moving better than expected despite her leg wound, while Rodriguez had found a second wind that allowed him to provide effective covering fire for their movement. But their progress was slow, and Rebecca understood that she needed to hold her position for at least another 10 minutes to give them sufficient time to reach safety. The radio traffic she was monitoring painted a grim picture of the overall tactical situation. Coalition forces across Kandahar were reporting similar ambushes, with casualty reports mounting and several units completely cut off from support. Air assets were engaged at multiple locations, and medical evacuation helicopters were struggling to reach wounded soldiers through the coordinated anti-aircraft fire that the insurgents had established. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's voice cut through the chaos with updates that confirmed Rebecca's worst fears about the scope of the attack. All units, Phoenix Actual. Enemy forces have established no-fly zones over 6 sectors using coordinated surface-to-air fire. Medical evacuation is suspended until we can suppress air defenses. Ground units are on their own until further notice. The implications of that transmission hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Even if she managed to get her team to the extraction Point. Helicopters couldn't reach them through the anti-aircraft umbrella the insurgents had created. They would need to fight their way to a more distant location, possibly several miles away, while carrying wounded soldiers and avoiding enemy patrols that were now actively hunting coalition forces throughout the city. Rebecca's tactical analysis was interrupted by movement in the building across the street. At least 4 insurgents were positioning themselves with rocket-propelled grenades, preparing to destroy her cover and eliminate her threat to their operation. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they would have clear shots at her position. The decision came without hesitation. Rebecca sprinted across the rooftop toward the building's edge, drawing fire from multiple positions, but reaching the ledge before the RPG team could acquire their target. The drop to the next building was 8 feet, manageable under normal circumstances, but potentially catastrophic while under fire and carrying full combat equipment. She jumped without looking back, landing hard on the adjacent rooftop and rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through her left shoulder where she'd hit the concrete, but nothing felt broken. More importantly, the movement had disrupted the insurgents' firing solutions and bought her precious seconds to establish a new position. From her new vantage point, Rebecca could see the RPG team repositioning to engage her previous location. Their focus on the empty rooftop provided her with an opportunity she couldn't waste. Her M4 carbine had been equipped with a grenade launcher for this mission, and she'd been saving her limited supply of 40mm rounds for exactly this type of target. The high-explosive round detonated in the center of the RPG team's position, eliminating the immediate threat while creating enough confusion to allow Rebecca to move again. But the explosion also revealed her new location to other insurgents, who immediately began concentrating fire on her position. Rebecca realized that she was fighting a losing battle of attrition. Every movement drew more attention. Every engagement revealed her position to additional enemies. The insurgents had numerical superiority and intimate knowledge of the terrain, while she was operating alone with limited ammunition and no support. But retreat wasn't an option while her team remained in danger. As Rebecca planned her next movement, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Bravo 7, this is Steel Rain 6. We're tracking your situation and moving to assist. Rebecca didn't recognize the call sign, but the voice carried the authority of an experienced combat commander. Steel Rain 6, Bravo 7. What's your position and strength? We're approximately 4 blocks south of your location with a reinforced squad. Marine Force Recon, attached to your operation for high-value target interdiction. We've been tracking the situation since the ambush began. The news that Marine Special Operations Forces were in the area provided Rebecca with her first hope for survival since the fighting had started. Force Recon units were among the most elite soldiers in the American military, specialists in exactly the type of urban combat she was currently fighting. Steel Rain 6, my team is moving toward Extraction Point Alpha with 2 wounded. I'm providing overwatch but taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Can you assist with clearing the route? Affirmative, Bravo 7. We're moving to engage enemy positions from the east while you maintain pressure from the north. Stand by for coordinated assault in approximately 5 minutes. Rebecca used those 5 minutes to study the tactical situation and identify targets for the Marines to engage. Her elevated position provided excellent observation of insurgent movements, and she began calling out enemy positions and strengths over the radio to help coordinate the coming assault. The Marine attack began with precision that demonstrated why Force Recon units were legendary among Special Operations Forces. Rebecca watched through her scope as insurgent positions erupted in carefully coordinated explosions, each blast timed to maximize confusion and prevent effective counterattacks. Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres, the Marine team leader, had earned his reputation during 3 deployments in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. His squad moved through urban terrain with the fluid precision of dancers, each Marine knowing exactly where his teammates were and what they were doing at all times. Their assault on the insurgent positions was a masterpiece of small unit tactics. Bravo 7, Steel Rain 6. Torres' voice carried calm professionalism despite the intensity of the fighting around him. We're engaging targets on your southern flank. Can you provide suppressive fire on the building complex to your northeast? Rebecca shifted her position to engage the targets Torres had identified, her shots coordinating perfectly with the Marines' assault. Together, they began systematically dismantling the insurgent network that had trapped Kumar's team. But the insurgents weren't finished. As their carefully planned ambush collapsed under the combined pressure of Rebecca's solo assault and the Marines' coordinated attack, they began employing increasingly desperate tactics. Suicide bombers emerged from concealed positions, attempting to destroy key intersections and trap coalition forces in collapsed buildings. The first suicide attack targeted Kumar's team directly, but Chun spotted the bomber approaching and managed to eliminate him before he could detonate his explosive vest. The blast from his dropped weapon injured Chun further, reopening her leg wound and leaving her barely able to walk. Martinez, Kumar's voice carried strain and exhaustion. Chun's down hard. We need immediate extraction or we're not going to make it. Rebecca could see her team's position from the rooftop, and the situation looked desperate. Rodriguez was now supporting Chun's weight while returning fire with his sidearm, having expended his rifle ammunition. Kumar was fighting effectively, but running low on ammunition himself. They were perhaps 2 blocks from the extraction point, but those 2 blocks contained an unknown number of insurgents who were now focusing their attention on the wounded Americans. Steel Rain 6, Bravo 7, Rebecca called over the radio. My team needs immediate assistance. 1 critically wounded, all running low on ammunition. Copy that, Bravo 7. We're moving to intercept your team's route. Can you provide covering? Fire for their final movement. Rebecca studied the route Kumar's team would need to travel and identified multiple potential ambush sites. The insurgents had clearly anticipated this movement and were positioning themselves to conduct one final assault on the escaping Americans. Steel Rain 6, be advised that enemy forces are concentrated along the extraction route. I'm going to draw their attention while you move to assist my team. Negative, Bravo 7. Too dangerous. We can handle the route clearance. But Rebecca was already moving, understanding that the Marines' approach would take too long to save her team. Shen was losing blood rapidly, and Rodriguez was operating on adrenaline and willpower alone. They needed immediate relief, and she was the only person in position to provide it. Rebecca's descent from the rooftop took her through the same building where she'd eliminated the sniper. But now the structure was filled with insurgents who had moved in to establish new firing positions. Each floor presented new challenges as she fought her way down through determined enemies who understood that their own survival depended on stopping her. The fighting in the confined spaces was brutal and personal. Rebecca's training in close quarters combat served her well, but each engagement drained her physically and emotionally. By the time she reached the ground floor, she'd been forced to kill 3 more insurgents in face-to-face combat that left her shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. But she was free of the building and in position to support her team's final push toward extraction. The street leading to the extraction point had become a gauntlet of fire and death. Insurgents had positioned themselves in windows, doorways, and behind improvised barriers, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. Kumar's team was pinned down behind an overturned vehicle, unable to advance and running critically low on ammunition. Rebecca emerged from the building, behind the insurgent positions like an avenging angel, her appearance so unexpected that several fighters turned their weapons away from Kumar's team to engage this new threat. The momentary confusion gave the Marines the opening they needed to assault the insurgent positions from their flank. The combined pressure from 3 directions broke the insurgents' final defensive line. those who weren't killed or wounded in. The assault began retreating toward the deeper parts of the city, abandoning their carefully prepared positions to save their own lives. Gunnery Sergeant Torres reached Kumar's position first, his corpsman immediately beginning treatment on Chen's wounds, while other Marines established a security perimeter. Rebecca arrived moments later, her ammunition nearly exhausted and her uniform torn and bloodstained from the morning's fighting. "Jesus, Martinez," Kumar said, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Where the hell did you learn to fight like that?" Rebecca managed a tired smile as she helped Rodriguez to his feet. "East L.A., Sergeant. Sometimes the neighborhood teaches you things the Army manual doesn't cover." Torres approached them with news about the extraction plan. The original helicopter landing zone was still under anti-aircraft fire, but the Marines had identified an alternative site approximately 1 mile away where helicopters could land safely. Chen could be carried that distance on a stretcher, but they would need to move quickly before insurgents reorganized and attempted another ambush. As the combined group began moving toward the new extraction point, Rebecca reflected on the morning's events. She disobeyed direct orders, conducted a solo assault against superior numbers, and fought her way through urban terrain that had been designed to kill American soldiers. Thompson's questions about her courage now seemed almost laughable. She hadn't just proven her ability to function under fire. She demonstrated leadership and tactical skill that exceeded many soldiers with years more experience. But more importantly, she'd saved her team. Franklin was dead, but Chen, Rodriguez, and Kumar were alive because she'd been willing to risk everything for their survival. The extraction helicopters were visible in the distance, approaching the landing zone under escort from attack aircraft that had finally suppressed the insurgents' air defenses. Rebecca could see the end of their ordeal approaching, but she also understood that this day would change her forever. She was no longer the uncertain recruit who had struggled with Thompson's doubts about her capabilities. She was a proven combat veteran who had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. The drill sergeant's questions had finally been answered. The Black Hawk helicopter lifted off from the improvised landing zone with a roar that echoed through the streets of Kandahar, carrying Rebecca and her team away from the battlefield that had claimed Franklin's life and nearly cost them all their own. Through the aircraft's window, she could see smoke rising from multiple locations across the city, evidence of the coordinated attacks that had transformed a routine surveillance mission into the bloodiest day of fighting in the region in over 6 months. Chun lay strapped to a medical gurney, conscious but pale from blood loss, while a Navy corpsman worked to stabilize her condition during the 20-minute flight to the combat surgical hospital at Kandahar Airfield. Rodriguez sat in silence, his shoulder wound professionally bandaged, but his eyes reflecting the 1,000-yard stare that Rebecca had seen in veterans who'd witnessed too much violence in too short a time. Kumar occupied the seat across from Rebecca, his expression thoughtful as he processed the morning's events. As the senior non-commissioned officer, he would be responsible for writing the after-action reports that would determine how the mission was officially recorded and what lessons would be learned from their experience. "Martinez," Kumar said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines, "what you did back there. I've been in this war for 3 deployments, and I've never seen anything like it." Rebecca didn't respond immediately, her attention focused on the landscape passing below them. Afghan farmers were working their fields despite the fighting in the city, their lives continuing according to rhythms that predated the American presence and would likely continue long after coalition forces departed. The contrast between their peaceful labor and the violence she'd just experienced seemed surreal. "I did what needed to be done, Sergeant," she finally replied. "That's what we're trained for." Kumar's laugh held no humor. "Training doesn't prepare you for what you did. Walking through enemy fire alone, conducting solo assaults against prepared positions, coordinating with special operations forces you'd never worked with before. That wasn't training, Martinez. That was something else entirely. The helicopter began its descent toward Kandahar airfield, where medical teams were waiting to receive the wounded and intelligence officers were preparing to debrief the survivors of what was already being called the Kandahar Market Massacre. Initial reports suggested that coalition forces had suffered over 40 casualties across 7 separate ambush sites, making it one of the deadliest single days in the war's recent history. As they touched down on the airfield's helipad, Rebecca caught sight of a familiar figure waiting among the medical personnel and base security teams. Colonel Patricia Hawkins, the deputy commander of coalition forces in southern Afghanistan, had personally come to oversee the evacuation and debriefing process. Her presence indicated that the morning's events had attracted attention at the highest levels of military command. Shun was immediately transferred to a waiting ambulance and rushed toward the surgical facilities, while Rodriguez was escorted to the base hospital for treatment of his shoulder wound. Kumar and Rebecca were directed toward a convoy of armored vehicles that would transport them to the intelligence compound for immediate debriefing. Colonel Hawkins approached Rebecca directly, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "Private Martinez, I'm Colonel Hawkins. I've been monitoring your situation since the ambush began. We need to talk." Rebecca came to attention despite her exhaustion and the informal circumstances of their meeting. "Yes, ma'am." "At ease, soldier. You've been through enough formality for one day." Hawkins gestured toward one of the armored vehicles. "I want to hear your account of the morning's events before the intelligence officers begin their formal questioning. There are aspects of this situation that require immediate attention." During the drive to the intelligence compound, Hawkins explained that the coordinated nature of the attacks had raised serious concerns about insurgent capabilities and intelligence. Sources: the level of planning and coordination demonstrated by the enemy exceeded previous assessments of their organizational abilities. "Someone provided them with detailed information about our operations," Hawkins said, her voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. "They knew exactly where your teams would be positioned, what your mission parameters were, and how you would likely respond to contact. That kind of intelligence doesn't come from casual observation." Rebecca absorbed this information while watching the base's defensive preparations through the vehicle's armored windows. Guard towers were fully manned, razor wire had been reinforced, and additional checkpoints had been established at all entry points. The entire facility was operating under heightened security protocols that suggested the threat wasn't over. "Ma'am," Rebecca said carefully, "if they had inside information about our operations, how do we know this facility is secure?" Hawkins' smile was grim but approving. "That's exactly the right question, Martinez. We don't know. Which is why your debriefing is going to be conducted under special security protocols." The intelligence compound was a fortress within a fortress, surrounded by multiple layers of security and staffed by personnel with the highest possible clearances. Rebecca had never been inside the facility before, and she was struck by the sophisticated technology and obvious expense that had gone into creating a secure environment for processing classified information. Major Stephen Walsh, the senior intelligence officer, was waiting in a windowless conference room equipped with recording equipment and communication systems that connected directly to Pentagon headquarters. Walsh had the pale complexion and intense focus of someone who spent most of his time analyzing data rather than operating in the field. "Private Martinez," Walsh began, activating the recording system. "This debriefing is being conducted under special security protocols. Everything you say will be classified at the highest levels and shared only with individuals who have specific need-to-know authorization." Rebecca nodded her understanding as Walsh began with standard questions about the mission timeline and her team's movements. But as the debriefing progressed, his questions became increasingly focused on her individual actions and decision-making process. "Walk me through your decision to leave the Overwatch position," Walsh said, consulting notes that seemed to contain detailed information about her movements. Your orders were explicit about maintaining surveillance and communication support. Rebecca described her analysis of the tactical situation and her conclusion that following orders would likely result in her team's death or capture. She explained her decision-making process and the factors that had influenced her choice to disobey Kumar's direct orders. At what point did you realize that the enemy had detailed intelligence about your mission? Walsh asked. When I saw their positioning and coordination, Rebecca replied. They weren't reacting to our presence. They were implementing a plan that had been prepared specifically for our operation. The ambush sites were too well prepared and too perfectly positioned to be coincidental. Walsh exchanged glances with Colonel Hawkins before continuing. Did you observe anything during your movement through the city that suggested enemy forces had communication or coordination capabilities beyond what we've previously encountered? Rebecca described the sophisticated radio equipment she'd seen in the building where she'd eliminated the sniper, as well as the maps that had shown detailed knowledge of coalition patrol routes. The level of intelligence preparation suggested capabilities that exceeded typical insurgent operations. Private Martinez, Hawkins interjected, I'm going to share some classified information with you that will help explain why your observations are so important. The colonel activated a secure computer terminal and displayed satellite imagery of Kandahar taken during the morning's attacks. The images showed the coordinated nature of the insurgent operations with a clarity that was startling, even to Rebecca, who had experienced the fighting firsthand. These attacks were coordinated across 7 separate locations with timing precision that required sophisticated communication systems, Hawkins explained. The enemy demonstrated capabilities that suggest they had access to our operational planning at the highest levels. Rebecca studied the satellite images, noting the precision with which insurgent forces had positioned themselves to maximum advantage at each location. The attacks hadn't been opportunistic responses to coalition movements. They had been carefully orchestrated operations designed to inflict maximum casualties. Ma'am, Rebecca said slowly, are you suggesting that someone within our own command structure provided intelligence to the enemy? That's exactly what we're investigating, Walsh replied. And your observations from inside the enemy positions may provide crucial evidence for that investigation. The implications of potential betrayal within coalition command structures was staggering. If insurgents had access to operational planning, it meant that every mission was potentially compromised, every operation subject to ambush by enemies who knew coalition movements in advance. There's something else, Hawkins said, displaying additional satellite imagery. Your actions during the fighting disrupted more than just the ambush of your team. By drawing enemy attention and forcing them to respond to unexpected threats, you caused them to reveal communication patterns and coordination methods that we've been trying to identify for months. Rebecca realized that her solo assault had inadvertently provided intelligence value beyond simply saving her team. By forcing the insurgents to adapt to unexpected developments, she had caused them to expose operational methods that could be analyzed and countered in future operations. The enemy's response to your actions revealed communication frequencies, coordination protocols, and leadership structures that we're now exploiting, Walsh explained. Your individual initiative may have provided more intelligence value than months of conventional surveillance operations. But the debriefing took an unexpected turn when Walsh began asking questions about Rebecca's background and training. His inquiries seemed designed to understand how a relatively inexperienced soldier had been able to conduct operations that exceeded the capabilities of many special operations personnel. Your military occupational specialty is intelligence analysis, Walsh noted, yet you demonstrated combat skills that suggest training beyond standard military instruction. Can you explain that? Rebecca described her upbringing in East Los Angeles and the survival skills she developed in an urban environment where violence was commonplace. She explained how those childhood experiences had translated into tactical awareness and decision-making abilities that complemented her military training. Urban warfare isn't just about weapons and tactics, she said. It's about reading environments, understanding human behavior, and making rapid decisions under pressure. Growing up where I did taught me those skills before I ever put on a uniform. Hawkins leaned forward with obvious interest. Private Martinez, have you considered applying for special operations training? The question caught Rebecca off guard. Special operations forces represented the elite of the American military, soldiers selected for capabilities and characteristics that exceeded conventional standards. The suggestion that she might qualify for such training was both flattering and intimidating. I hadn't considered it, ma'am, Rebecca replied honestly. I thought my role was in intelligence analysis. Your role, Hawkins said with a slight smile, is whatever best serves your country and maximizes your capabilities. What you demonstrated today suggests capabilities that could be developed into something extraordinary. Walsh consulted his notes before asking his final questions. Private Martinez, if you had to estimate enemy strength during the ambush, what would you assess? Rebecca closed her eyes, recalling her observations of muzzle flashes, movement patterns, and tactical positioning. At least 30 fighters directly engaged with our position, possibly more in support roles. They had heavy weapons, sophisticated communications, and detailed knowledge of the terrain. And you engaged in how many of them personally? 7. Confirmed kills, Rebecca replied without emotion. Possibly more during the building clearance operations. The numbers hung in the air like a physical presence. A single soldier, operating alone and without support, had eliminated nearly a quarter of an enemy force that had been specifically prepared to ambush American troops. It was a level of individual effectiveness that approached legendary status among combat veterans. Private Martinez, Hawkins said, standing to indicate the debriefing's conclusion. You're going to be hearing from a lot of people over the next few days. Reporters, investigators, senior officers who want to understand what happened here. I want you to remember something. What you did today saved lives and provided intelligence that will save many more lives in the future. As Rebecca left the intelligence compound and returned to her unit's barracks, she reflected on the morning's transformation. She had begun the day as a soldier struggling with self-doubt, planted by a drill sergeant's harsh assessment of her capabilities. She was ending it as a proven combat veteran whose actions had attracted attention at the highest levels of military command. But she was also ending it without Franklin, whose death would haunt her regardless of how many enemy fighters she'd killed in response. War demanded payment in blood, and victory always came at a cost that couldn't be measured in tactical success or strategic advantage. The notification was waiting on her bunk when she returned to quarters. Orders to report to the base commanders. Office at 0800 hours the following morning for a ceremony that would formally recognize her actions. Rebecca stared at the paper, understanding that her military career had changed forever in the span of a single morning's fighting. Thompson's questions about her courage had been answered, but the cost of that answer was higher than either of them had ever imagined. The medal ceremony took place on the parade ground at Kandahar airfield under a blazing Afghan sun that seemed to intensify the weight of the moment. Rebecca stood at attention in her dress uniform, the fabric crisp despite the heat, while hundreds of coalition soldiers formed precise ranks behind her. The ceremony had drawn personnel from across the base, including Afghan National Army officers whose presence symbolized the international nature of the conflict. Brigadier General Anthony Morrison, commander of coalition forces in southern Afghanistan, held the Bronze Star Medal with Valor device in his hands as he prepared to deliver the citation that would forever change how Rebecca's service was officially recorded. The general was a decorated veteran of multiple conflicts whose own chest bore testimony to decades of military service. Private First Class Rebecca Martinez, General Morrison began, his voice carrying across the parade ground through the bases. Public address system, for exceptionally valorous actions in ground combat against hostile enemy forces during Operation Mountain Thunder on September 15th. The formal language couldn't capture the reality of what Rebecca had experienced, but she understood that military ceremonies served purposes beyond individual recognition. Her actions were being held up as an example of the courage and competence expected from American soldiers, regardless of their background or the doubts others might have about their capabilities. As Morrison continued reading the citation, Rebecca's thoughts drifted to the phone call she'd received the previous evening. Her parents had been contacted by Army officials and informed that their daughter was receiving a significant decoration for heroism in combat. The pride in her mother's voice had been unmistakable, but Rebecca had also heard the underlying fear that came from knowing her daughter was serving in one of the world's most dangerous places. Martinez demonstrated extraordinary courage by voluntarily leaving a position of relative safety to assault superior enemy forces and rescue wounded teammates. Morrison continued. Her actions resulted in 7 confirmed enemy casualties and the successful extraction of her entire team. The words felt strange to Rebecca, transforming her desperate fight for survival into language suitable for official records and military history. But she also understood that her story would be used to inspire other soldiers, particularly young women who faced similar doubts about their place in combat roles. After the ceremony concluded and the formal photographs were taken, Rebecca was approached by Captain Jennifer Hayes, a public affairs officer who had been assigned to coordinate media coverage of the event. The story of a young female soldier conducting a solo assault to save her team had attracted attention from news organizations around the world. "Private Martinez," Hayes said, consulting her tablet. "We have interview requests from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and about a dozen other major outlets. The Army is very interested in sharing your story, but the decision about media participation is ultimately yours." Rebecca had mixed feelings about the attention her actions were receiving. While she appreciated the recognition, she was also concerned about the potential for her story to be sensationalized or misrepresented. The reality of combat was far more complex and morally ambiguous than most media portrayals suggested. "Ma'am," Rebecca replied, "I'd prefer to focus on my duties rather than media interviews. My team is still recovering from their wounds, and we have ongoing missions to prepare for." Hayes nodded understandingly. "I respect that position, but I should mention that your story is already being reported, whether you participate or not. Providing your perspective might help ensure accuracy." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Major Patricia Blake, the senior enlisted advisor to the base commander. Blake was a legend among non-commissioned officers, having served in every major conflict of the past 20 years while rising through the ranks based on competence and leadership rather than political connections. "Martinez," Blake said, "the general wants to see you in his office. There are some people here who want to discuss your future." Rebecca followed Blake through the base headquarters building, passing offices where intelligence analysts worked, to understand the broader implications of the Kandahar attacks. The investigation into potential security breaches had expanded rapidly, with teams from multiple agencies working to identify how insurgents had obtained such detailed operational intelligence. General Morrison's office was larger than Rebecca had expected, decorated with artifacts from his various deployments and photographs showing him with senior military and political leaders. But the room's current occupants were what captured her attention. Colonel Hawkins was present, along with 2 officers she didn't recognize who wore the distinctive insignia of Special Operations Forces. "Private Martinez," Morrison said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "I'd like you to meet Colonel David Stone from Army Special Operations Command and Major Lisa Crawford from the Ranger Training Brigade." Colonel Stone was exactly what Rebecca had expected a special operations officer to look like: lean, weathered, and possessed of the quiet confidence that came from years of conducting the military's most challenging missions. Major Crawford, by contrast, was younger and had the intense focus of someone dedicated to training elite soldiers. "Private Martinez," Stone began, "we've been reviewing your actions during the Kandahar engagement, and we're impressed by what we've seen. Your individual initiative, tactical thinking, and combat effectiveness suggest you might be suited for more specialized roles." Rebecca listened carefully as Stone explained the various paths available for soldiers who demonstrated exceptional capabilities. Special Forces, Rangers, and other elite units were always seeking personnel who could operate independently and make sound decisions under extreme pressure. "Your background is particularly interesting," Major Crawford added. "Urban combat skills, intelligence analysis training, and proven performance under fire. That combination is exactly what we're looking for in candidates for the Cultural Support Team program." The Cultural Support Team program was designed to provide special operations forces with female soldiers who could interact with women and children in conservative societies where male soldiers faced cultural restrictions. It was demanding, dangerous work that required soldiers capable of operating at the same level as their special operations counterparts. "The training is intensive," Crawford continued, "but based on what you demonstrated in Kandahar, we believe you have the potential to excel in this role." Rebecca found herself facing a decision that would determine the trajectory of her entire military career. Accepting special operations training would mean leaving behind the relative safety of intelligence work for roles that involved constant danger and extreme physical and mental demands. "Ma'am," Rebecca said carefully, "can I ask why you're offering this opportunity to someone with so little experience?" Stone smiled slightly. "Experience can be taught, Martinez. What you demonstrated in Kandahar can't be taught. You have instincts, courage, and decision-making abilities that some soldiers never develop despite years of training. There's also the matter of your symbolic value," General Morrison added. "The military is evolving, and we need women in combat roles who can serve as examples for others. Your story demonstrates that courage and competence aren't determined by gender." Rebecca understood the broader implications of Morrison's comment. Her actions in Kandahar had occurred at a time when the military was expanding opportunities for women in combat roles, making her story particularly significant for policy discussions in Washington. But she also understood that accepting special operations training would mean accepting responsibility for representing more than just her own capabilities. She would become a symbol of women's potential in combat roles, with all the pressure and scrutiny that such symbolism entailed. "I need time to consider this," Rebecca said. "It's a significant decision that will affect not just my career, but my entire life." "Of course," Stone replied. "Take whatever time you need. But I should mention that opportunities like this don't come along often. We're offering you a chance to serve at the highest levels of military operations." After the meeting concluded, Rebecca walked across the base toward the medical facility where Chun was recovering from surgery. The afternoon heat was oppressive, but she needed time to process the conversation and consider her options. Chun was awake and alert when Rebecca arrived, her leg elevated and surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked her vital signs. Despite her injuries, Chun seemed to be in good spirits and was eager to discuss the morning's events. "I heard about your medal ceremony," Chun said with a smile. "Bronze Star with V device. That's serious recognition, Martinez." "It doesn't feel real yet," Rebecca replied, taking a seat beside Chun's bed. 6 months ago, Thompson was questioning whether I had the courage for combat. Now they're offering me special operations training. Chun's expression became thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened during the ambush. The way you operated independently, made tactical decisions, coordinated with the Marines. That wasn't just courage, Rebecca. That was leadership. The observation resonated with Rebecca because it reflected something she'd been struggling to understand about her own actions. During the fighting, she hadn't just been reacting to threats. She'd been actively shaping the tactical situation and influencing the outcome through her decisions. Thompson's questions were about whether you could function under fire, Shun continued, but what you demonstrated was much more than that. You showed that you could take control of chaotic situations and impose your will on them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Kumar, who had come to check on his wounded team member. His arm was in a sling from a shoulder injury Rebecca hadn't noticed during the fighting, but he seemed to be in good condition otherwise. Martinez, Kumar said, I just finished my after-action report. I recommended you for promotion to specialist and assignment to a leadership development program. The suggestion caught Rebecca off guard. She'd been focused on the special operations opportunity and hadn't considered the possibility of advancement within conventional forces. Sergeant, she said, I'm not sure I'm ready for leadership responsibilities. Yesterday, I was just trying to keep my team alive. Kumar's laugh held genuine warmth. Yesterday you were leading, whether you realized it or not. You made decisions that affected the entire tactical situation, coordinated with multiple units, and achieved objectives that seemed impossible. That's what leaders do. As Rebecca left the medical facility and returned to her quarters, she reflected on the competing visions of her future that had been presented. Special operations offered the chance to serve at elite levels and represent women's capabilities in combat roles. Conventional leadership development offered the opportunity to influence and train other soldiers while advancing through traditional military hierarchies. Both paths represented dramatic departures from the intelligence analysis role she'd originally envisioned for herself. But both also reflected recognition that her actions in Kandahar had revealed capabilities that exceeded her original military occupational specialty. That evening, Rebecca sat in her quarters writing a letter to her parents, trying to explain the opportunity she was considering, without revealing classified details about her mission or the ongoing investigation into security breaches. The task was challenging because so much of what had happened couldn't be shared with civilians. She also found herself writing a letter she would never send, addressed to Franklin's memory. Her friend from basic training had died before seeing Rebecca proved Thompson wrong about her capabilities, but she felt the need to honor his memory by explaining how his death had motivated her actions. You always believed I was stronger than Thompson thought, she wrote. I wish you could have seen me prove it. I wish you could have made it home to see your family's ranch again. I promise I'll make sure your sacrifice means something. The sound of her door opening interrupted her writing. Sergeant Major Blake entered without knocking, a privilege of her rank and position. Martinez, Blake said, I wanted to talk to you about the decisions you're facing. I've been where you are, early in my career, when opportunities opened up that I hadn't expected. Rebecca stood at attention, but Blake gestured for her to remain seated. This isn't a formal conversation, soldier. This is one woman talking to another about choices that will define your life. Blake took a seat across from Rebecca, her expression serious but not unfriendly. I've read your service record, your performance evaluations, and the reports from Kandahar. You have potential that goes far beyond what you've shown so far. Sergeant Major, Rebecca said, I'm not sure I understand what I'm supposed to do with that potential. That's exactly the right question, Blake replied. Potential without direction is just wasted energy. You need to decide what kind of soldier you want to be, what kind of impact you want to have. Blake explained that military careers were shaped by a series of critical decisions, each one opening some doors while closing others. The choices Rebecca made over the next few months would determine whether she became a special operations warrior, a conventional leader, or something else entirely. The most important thing, Blake concluded, is that you choose based on your own values and goals, not on what others expect from you. You've already proven you have the courage to make hard decisions under pressure. Now you need to apply that same courage to deciding your future. After Blake left, Rebecca returned to her letter writing, but her focus had shifted. Instead of trying to explain her situation to others, she began writing to herself, trying to articulate what she wanted from her military service and what kind of person she wanted to become. The process forced her to confront questions she'd been avoiding since joining the Army. Did she want to serve in roles that would constantly place her in danger? Was she prepared for the physical and mental demands of elite military units? Could she handle the pressure of representing women's capabilities in combat roles? But as she wrote, Rebecca realized that Kandahar had already answered the most important question. She wasn't just capable of handling extreme challenges. She was someone who sought them out when others needed her help. Thompson's questions about her courage had been definitively answered, but they'd also revealed something he couldn't have anticipated. Rebecca Martinez wasn't just brave enough for combat. She was brave enough to lead others through it. 3 weeks after the Kandahar engagement, Rebecca found herself standing outside the offices of the Criminal Investigation Division at Bagram Air Base, holding classified documents that could potentially identify the source of the intelligence leak that had made the coordinated attacks possible. The investigation had expanded beyond simple operational security concerns into a full-scale counterintelligence operation involving multiple agencies and reaching into the highest levels of coalition command. Special Agent Maria Santos, a veteran investigator with the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, had requested Rebecca's assistance in analyzing the timeline of events and identifying potential security vulnerabilities. Santos had spent 15 years investigating everything from financial crimes to espionage, developing an intuitive understanding of how betrayal operated within military organizations. Private Martinez, Santos said, reviewing the case files. Spread across her desk, your observations from inside enemy positions provide unique insights into their operational capabilities. We need to understand exactly what they knew and when they knew it. Rebecca had been granted special security clearances for this investigation, allowing her access to intelligence reports and communication intercepts that painted a disturbing picture of enemy preparation. The insurgents hadn't just known about coalition patrol schedules. They possessed detailed information about individual soldiers, including their names, specialties, and personal backgrounds. Agent Santos, Rebecca said, studying a captured enemy document that contained her own photograph and military identification number. They knew things about our personnel that shouldn't be available to anyone without direct access to our systems. The investigation had already identified several potential security breaches, including compromised communication systems and infiltration of Afghan National Army units. But the level of detailed intelligence the insurgents had possessed suggested something more systematic than opportunistic information gathering. Santos activated a secure computer terminal and displayed a series of intercepted communications between insurgent leaders. The conversations, conducted in coded language that had taken weeks to decipher, revealed planning that had begun months before the actual attacks. They were specifically targeting high-value personnel, Santos explained. Intelligence specialists, special operations forces, anyone whose capture or elimination would provide significant propaganda value or operational advantage. Rebecca realized that she had been personally targeted, not because of her individual actions, but because enemy intelligence had identified her as someone whose skills and training made her a valuable target. The ambush hadn't been random violence. It had been a carefully planned assassination attempt. "Ma'am," Rebecca said slowly, "if they had this level of intelligence about our operations, how many other missions have been compromised?" Santos' expression was grim. "That's what we're trying to determine. We've identified at least 12 operations over the past 6 months that may have been affected by intelligence leaks. The scope of potential betrayal was staggering. If enemy forces had been receiving advance warning about coalition operations for months, it could explain the increasing effectiveness of insurgent attacks and the rising casualty rates among American forces. Their meeting was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel James Mitchell, a counterintelligence specialist who had been flown in from Washington specifically for this investigation. Mitchell was accompanied by a civilian analyst whose presence indicated the involvement of other government agencies beyond the military. "Private Martinez," Mitchell said, "we need to discuss something that goes beyond the Kandahar attacks. Your actions during that engagement may have inadvertently disrupted a much larger operation." Mitchell explained that the insurgents' communications, which had been intercepted during the chaotic fighting, had revealed connections to a broader network of enemy operatives throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan. Rebecca's solo assault had forced them to break radio silence and coordinate in ways that exposed previously unknown relationships. "The intelligence you helped us gather has led to the identification of a major enemy network," the civilian analyst added. "We're now tracking operatives across multiple countries, including some who have been planning attacks against targets in the United States." Rebecca struggled to process the implications of what she was being told. Her desperate fight to save her team had apparently contributed to uncovering a terrorist network with international reach and capabilities that extended far beyond the local insurgency in Afghanistan. "Sir," Rebecca said, "I was just trying to keep my teammates alive. I had no idea about any larger intelligence operation." Mitchell smiled slightly. "The best intelligence often comes from unplanned circumstances. Your actions forced the enemy to reveal information they'd kept hidden for years. But the investigation had also revealed disturbing information about the source of the original intelligence leak. Evidence suggested that the betrayal had come from within coalition command structures, possibly from someone with access to the highest levels of operational planning. We're conducting polygraph examinations of all personnel with access to the compromised information," Santos explained. "That includes everyone from intelligence analysts to senior commanders." Rebecca understood that she would likely be subject to such examinations herself, despite being a victim of the intelligence leak rather than a potential source. The investigation required thoroughness that extended to anyone who had been involved in the compromised operations. "Agent Santos," Rebecca said, "what happens if you can't identify the source of the leak?" "Then we have to assume that our entire intelligence apparatus has been compromised," Mitchell replied. "That would require fundamental changes to how we conduct operations in this theater." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the base communications center. Colonel Hawkins was requesting Rebecca's immediate presence at the Tactical Operations Center for a developing situation that required her specific expertise. Rebecca made her way across Bagram Air Base to the heavily secured building that housed the coalition's primary command and control facilities. The operations center was a sophisticated facility filled with communication equipment, intelligence displays, and personnel coordinating military actions across the entire region. Hawkins was standing before a large screen displaying satellite imagery of a compound in eastern Afghanistan near the Pakistani border. The facility appeared to be heavily fortified and surrounded by defensive positions that suggested significant military value. "Martinez," Hawkins said without preamble, "we've identified the location where the intelligence used against your team was processed. It's a command and control facility that's been coordinating insurgent operations across the region." Rebecca studied the satellite imagery, noting the sophisticated communication equipment and the number of personnel visible around the compound. This wasn't a typical insurgent hideout. It was a military facility capable of coordinating complex operations across multiple countries. "Ma'am," Rebecca said, "what's my role in this operation?" "Your experience inside enemy positions during the Kandahar fighting gives you unique insights into their operational methods," Hawkins explained. We need your analysis of their likely defensive preparations and potential vulnerabilities. Major General Robert Hayes, the overall commander of Coalition Special Operations Forces, approached their position with obvious urgency. Hayes was a legend among special operations personnel, having planned and executed some of the most successful counter-terrorism operations of the past decade. "Private Martinez," Hayes said, "I've read the reports from Kandahar. Your tactical analysis and individual initiative were exceptional. We need someone with your insights to help plan this operation." Rebecca found herself in the unprecedented position of being consulted by senior officers on operational planning for a major assault. Her observations from the street-level fighting in Kandahar were being used to understand enemy capabilities and predict their likely responses to coalition actions. The target compound was located in terrain that favored defenders, surrounded by mountains that provided natural barriers and observation positions. Any assault would require precise coordination between multiple units and careful consideration of enemy escape routes. "Based on what I observed in Kandahar," Rebecca said, "studying the terrain maps, they'll have prepared multiple fallback positions and coordinated communication systems. They won't just defend the primary facility. They'll try to draw attacking forces into prepared kill zones." Her analysis was incorporated into the operational planning as senior officers refined their approach to the target. Rebecca realized that her street-level combat experience was providing perspectives that complemented the strategic thinking of senior commanders. But the planning session was interrupted by urgent intelligence reports from multiple sources. The compound they were preparing to assault had apparently detected signs of the impending operation and was beginning to evacuate key personnel and equipment. "Sir," the intelligence officer reported to General Hayes, "we're seeing increased vehicle movement and communication activity at the target site. They appear to be implementing evacuation protocols." Hayes studied the incoming intelligence with obvious frustration. "How could they know about our operation?" "The planning has been compartmentalized at the highest security levels." The answer came from Agent Santos, who had arrived at the operations center with updated information from her investigation. "General, we've identified the source of the intelligence leak. It's someone with direct access to operational planning at this facility." The revelation that the betrayal was coming from within their own command structure sent shockwaves through the assembled officers. Rebecca realized that they were dealing with an enemy who had been reading their operational plans in real time, possibly for months. "Who is it?" Hawkins demanded. Santos consulted her notes before responding. "Lieutenant Colonel Mark Stevens, the Deputy Intelligence Officer. We've been monitoring his communications, and he's been providing detailed operational intelligence to enemy contacts for at least 6 months. Stevens was immediately placed under arrest, but the damage had already been done. The target compound was rapidly becoming empty as enemy forces evacuated with equipment and personnel that represented months of intelligence collection efforts." "General," Rebecca said, addressing Hayes directly, "if they're evacuating the compound, they're probably moving to predetermined fallback positions. In Kandahar, the insurgents had multiple prepared sites for exactly this type of contingency." Hayes studied the satellite imagery with renewed focus. "What would you look for if you were trying to identify their fallback positions?" Rebecca pointed to several locations on the tactical display, where terrain features would provide natural advantages for defensive operations. Her analysis was based on the same urban warfare instincts that had served her during the Kandahar fighting, applied to mountain terrain that offered similar advantages to defending forces. "They'll want positions that allow observation of multiple approach routes while providing escape options if they're overwhelmed," she explained. "These ridgelines offer exactly those characteristics." The assembled officers began incorporating Rebecca's analysis into revised operational plans, but she could see that the window for effective action was closing rapidly. The enemy's advance warning had given them crucial time to implement evacuation and dispersal protocols. "Private Martinez," General Hayes said, "your insights have been invaluable, but this situation demonstrates why we need personnel like you in more advanced roles. Have you given consideration to the special operations opportunities you've been offered?" Rebecca realized that her involvement in high-level operational planning was serving as an informal audition for advancement to elite military units. Her analytical capabilities and combat experience were being evaluated by officers who could open doors to opportunities she'd never imagined. "Sir," she replied, "I'm seriously considering those opportunities. Today has shown me that I might be able to contribute more than I originally thought possible." Hayes nodded approvingly. "The military's evolving, Martinez. We need officers who can think tactically, operate independently, and adapt to unexpected circumstances. You've demonstrated all of those capabilities." As the immediate crisis subsided and revised operational plans were implemented, Rebecca reflected on how dramatically her military career had changed since the morning in Kandahar, when she'd walked through enemy fire to save her team. She was now being consulted by general officers, contributing to operational planning, and being offered opportunities that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. But she also understood that with greater opportunities came greater responsibilities. The decisions she made about her future would affect not just her own career, but the lives of other soldiers who would serve under her leadership and the success of operations that could have strategic implications. Thompson's questions about her courage had initiated a journey that was leading her toward responsibilities and challenges she'd never anticipated. The drill sergeant who had doubted her capabilities couldn't have imagined that his harsh assessment would motivate her to prove herself at the highest levels of military service. As Rebecca left the operations center and returned to her quarters, she knew that her time as a conventional soldier was ending. The question was no longer whether she had the courage for combat. It was whether she had the wisdom and strength to handle the leadership responsibilities that her demonstrated capabilities were making inevitable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.